think that's right. All right. Hey, peeps. All right, I'm back. So where am I at here? What am I doing? Oh, let me open up where is it at? Okay. I thought I had I was going to use the app instead of my iPad, but that's okay. I can just use my iPad. All right. So it's study group time, y'all. So for those of you who are tuning in, wanting readings, I'm no longer doing readings. That was in the last hour that we're in our study group time. So we're reading A Course in Miracles. So that's what we're doing here. I think my hair's all jacked up from wearing that helmet or the headset for so long. All right, so bringing this up. Cool. All right, so for those of you following along, we are reading A Course in Miracles, the completed and annotated version or edition. And this is a book about a woman, her name is Helen Schumann, and she essentially is channeling a higher being, which in the book she refers to as Jesus. So she believes that she's channeling Jesus. And so they're having conversations. And she's actually a psychotherapist. So she has a background in psychotherapy. And this is, I think it's from like the 70s, maybe the 80s, but I'm thinking it's around that time frame. And so with the regular Course in Miracles, she is, it just kind of skips over some things that she has in her notes. The one that I have is the one with her notes because I kind of want to understand some things from the perspective that she was trying to make sense of in the moment that she was reading it. So that's why I have this version of it as well. So if you are tuning in for readings, that was, like I said, the last hour. So I'll be back on Friday. I'll be back on Friday to do more readings as well. I'm going to do another experiment on Friday as well because I want to get more consistent data. All right. So where did we leave off here? So the last time they were talking in the book. The last time they were talking about the false. What is it? False denial or denial. The idea of denial and like denying the reality or denying someone's, I guess, internal mechanisms that are in error, and what proper denial is versus atonement or coming to peace or resolving the actual issues that exist within us. So as I read through it, there's a lot of religious references. It's not because she's trying to discuss religion, she's actually just using religious references in the process of understanding the information and the communication between her and God. So for those of you who are tuning in, if you're reading along, I'm on page what page am I on? I'm on page 69. I'm on page 69 of the book. And I'm going to read through some of it, and then I'm going to stop, and then we will, pick up where we left off, and then I'll talk about some stuff as well. All right, so let's see. Number 7. God offers only mercy. Your own words should always reflect only mercy, because that is what you have received. Make sure everything's over here. Okay, cool. Yeah. That is what God offers only. Hold on. Give me a second because I'm trying to. Oh, perfect. Cool. I was trying to figure out something over here. Okay, cool. Whenever you're afraid, you are deceived. Your mind is not serving your soul. This literally starves the soul by denying its daily bread. In this connection, there is a poem about the Holy Family that says, "Where tricks of words are never said and mercy is as plain as bread." God offers only mercy. Your own words should always reflect only mercy, because that is what you have received and that is what you should give. Justice is a temporary expedient or an attempt to teach you the meaning of mercy. Its judgmental side arises only because you are capable of injustice, if that is what your mind makes. You are afraid of God's will because you have used your own will, which he created in the likeness of his own, to miscreate. What you do not realize is that the mind can miscreate only when it is not free. An imprisoned mind is not free by definition. It is possessed or held back by itself. Its will is therefore limited and not free to assert itself. So in other words, what they're talking about here is, first of all, we're always creating. We're always producing something. We're always we're always in the state of the creator. We are creation. We are creators. We are a representation of God, of source here in physical form. We are always creating. And no matter what we're doing, even when we're sleeping, we're always creating. We're always producing and adding to this like realm or to this physical existence. So every thought, every idea, every emotion, every reaction that we have is a creative process for us. We're actually creating we're creating something that essentially either is going to help to produce a part of this reality. It's going to contribute to part of this reality, or it's going to produce something new within this reality. But it's all still within this reality because we are producing from this reality. So when we are creating from a state of pure love or from a state of pure connection and awareness and understanding and acceptance of our connection to all things, if we're like seeing ourselves in everything, but we're also creating from that place of love and purity, then the creation is going to have a lot more power, and it's going to have a lot more ability to essentially ripple out into the universe and to affect everyone in the process, in a state of affirming God or affirming our connection to source or us as source. When we are caught up in our own drama, in our own human struggles, or in our own human pain, we are creating from that space. This is why it is so important that when we wake up every morning and we go throughout our day, that we don't spend so much time caught up in the struggle and the suffering and worrying and lower vibratory states. Because when we go forward and create, we're creating from that state. Even if we try to be positive, even if we try to produce something that is beneficial for ourselves or others, we're still creating from that disadvantaged state. And we're essentially not free to produce in the most, in the purest way possible or the most effective way possible. So we are limited in what we can create. Most people, when they start to realize that they have the power to create their universe or to create life, immediately they start to want to create physical things like, oh, I want a new car, or I want a new job. Like, that's a very surface level understanding and awareness of existence. We aren't here to have beautiful cars. We aren't here to have, that's part of our experience here, but we're not here. We don't come here to have the newest car. We don't come here to have the newest clothes. We don't come here to be the prettiest person ever, unless there's a soul plan that is attached to that experience. And so most of us, when we try to create, understanding our power to create, we go to a very superficial existence, superficial form of creating. We don't ever go deeper than that. But when you come from a place of love and a place of pure awareness of source and of all that is, you're coming from a much more direct form of creating, a direct form of manifesting. When you create from a place of love, it has so much more power than if you create from a place of lack, from a place of fear, from a place of disadvantage, from a place of suffering. It is all right to remember the past, provided you also remember that anything you suffer is because of your own errors. As an analogy, imagine a very young child who falls down the stairs when an adult... I think I read this last week. Let me fast forward because I think I already read through this. So let me go over to... Okay, just went to the next page because I think I covered that last week. The reinterpretation of defenses. That's where we're at. Freud's identification of defense mechanisms was quite correct, as was his recognition of their creative ability. They can indeed produce your perception, both of yourself and your surroundings, but Freud's limitations induced inevitable limits on his own perception. He made two kinds of errors. The first was that he saw only how the mechanisms worked in the mentally ill. The second was his own denial of the mechanism of the atonement. Let us take up the first, because a clear understanding of the second depends on it. Denial should be directed only to error, and projection should be limited to truth. You should truly give as you have truly received. The golden rule can work effectively only on this basis. In other words, when they're talking about denial should be directed only to error, and projection should be limited to truth. So if we are operating from a place of error, which means we have completely bought in to the reality that there's only scarcity, there's only lack, there's only pain, there's only suffering, etc. When we are creating from that state, again, we're not really going to go very far with that, and we're only going to perpetuate the state of suffering. But denial is a very useful tool in that if you deny the reality that is what this is all about. In other words, if I deny that I am a child of pain, a child of suffering, a child or a product of this lower vibratory state, then I immediately will align, or I will reconnect with my true authentic self, which is the form of source, the version of me that is connected with the higher source being. And it said projection should be limited to truth. Projection, it depends on how you look at projection. Projection, whenever people are going through life and we are dealing with other people, we have a tendency of projecting our own stuff on others. And instead of us seeing others for who they are, for what is there, we end up kind of overshadowing them with our own garbage, with our own stuff. And so we project ourselves onto them. But that projection of us, what we're projecting out, what we're projecting onto those people, is not authentically who that person is. And it also isn't an authentic representation of who we are, but it does highlight what we're struggling with or what is going on within us that is forcing us to project ourselves onto others. So for example, like when I have a client reach out to me and they are asking me about a particular person that they're in love with, or that they feel a connection to. And I tell that person, I don't really see that relationship, or I'm not really seeing it progressing forward. That person may sometimes, and this happens sometimes, not a lot actually, but sometimes, the person will get angry with me, or they'll be upset with me, and they'll immediately begin to come after me or tell me, you're wrong, or you're not accurate, or this or that. That's a projection. They're projecting their own refusal to accept the potential reality of the situation. They're projecting their fear of being rejected. They're projecting their own denial of not being enough for this person, which that's a belief that they're holding. That's not the reality, but they believe that if this person doesn't accept them, then they are being rejected, or that they're not worthy enough, or that they're not good enough. So they're projecting all of these issues onto me, and they're using me as a focal point to basically push that reality within them away. They're not looking at themselves, they're looking at me, and they're using me as the target. So they're projecting that craziness onto me, and that's a projection. And we have a tendency of doing that. We a lot of times will project our own issues onto other people. A lot of people have a tendency of projecting this sense of they demonize people who they've been in a relationship with. So if I was with somebody, it didn't work out, that person must be evil. That's an automatic thing that people do, instead of saying, maybe I just wasn't what this person was looking for. Maybe this person isn't really wanting something serious. They don't humanize the experience. Instead, they create this alternate version of what is potentially happening, or they demonize that person, or they project this evil. They must be evil, or they must be bad, or whatever. So that's what people have a tendency of doing there. Intellectualization is a poor word which stems from the brain-mind confusion. Right-mindedness is better. This device defends the right mind and gives it control over the body. Intellectualization implies a split, whereas right-mindedness involves healing. Right? So intellectualization, a few sessions ago when we were doing the study group, we talked about the different types of possession. And intellectualization is a form of possession. In other words, people, instead of connecting with the emotional human experience of something, they try to intellectualize everything, or they only come from a place of complete detachment in their head where they don't care about the human experience. They only care about the data, or they're approaching it from a data point. And that becomes a bit of an obsession. It's kind of a possession, because they're essentially being possessed by the intellectualization of things. And so when they talk about intellectualization, that's what they're talking about. So right-mindedness just because you're intellectual or just because you are seeing things from an intellectual standpoint doesn't mean that you're perceiving experience or life in a right way. That just means that that's a perspective that you're holding. We are not designed to be robots or machines without emotions. We are supposed to have a full range of human experience. And when we disconnect from the human experience and we only approach it from an intellectual standpoint, we miss a lot of meaningful, valuable opportunity for growth on the soul level, for awareness from a spiritual perspective, from connection on a human perspective. So there's a lot that you miss out on and that you actually kind of turn your back on because you're trying to only approach it from an intellectual standpoint. But there's more to it than that. And so being intellectual only is a kind of possession, because you become consumed by that method of operating and you stick to that no matter what, even when it serves you to be more connected with your emotions. This is why some people, especially males in particular, they're very detached or they're very disconnected, or they just don't emotionally care about the emotional experience, and they don't even express things or even assess things from an emotional standpoint, because for them, to some extent, that emotional connection is either too difficult, it may be too exhausting for them. They may have had experiences growing up where they did not really feel, they were not allowed to feel, or they were conditioned out of feeling through their upbringing. So it's really hard because those individuals, there's an opportunity for a connection, a deeper connection with people, and they miss out on that opportunity because they limit that ability to connect properly. Withdrawal is properly employed in the service of withdrawing from the desert. It is not a device for escape, but for consideration. There is only one mind. This is what I talked about last time, where I personally go through the withdrawal process quite often. So whenever there's a lot going on, or I am overwhelmed, or I'm like, this just like too much data, not enough processing capability for me, I tend to withdraw myself and I tend to go more within, or I just spend some time in my own energy because I need to reconnect or kind of rebond with the version of myself. And I need to come from a place of full awareness and not just in reaction to the circumstances. I feel like we've read this. I feel like we've already read this because I'm like, I feel like I've already read this before. Right? I feel like I've already read this because I talked about this. I talked about flight and destination I saw that sublimation. I talked about that as well. I think I talked about this the last time. I think I must have gotten on the wrong page here, if I'm not mistaken, because I feel like I'm on the wrong page. Give me a second, guys. Let me see if I can find my spot, because I feel like some of these are already gone over in the last 1 or 2 episodes that we did this. Okay. I think I'm going to go to the next section because I feel like I've already covered this stuff. So the next section, what is it? Page 73. The atonement as defense. The atonement, and when they talk about atonement, they mean coming to peace with, or coming to a state of peace around an issue, or around a subject matter, or around an experience. So atonement. The atonement is the only defense which cannot be used destructively. That is because while everyone must eventually join it, it was not a device which was generated by humanity. The atonement principle was in effect long before the atonement itself was begun. The principle was love, and the atonement itself was an act of love. Acts were not necessary before the separation because the time-space belief did not exist. What they're talking about right there with the separation, when they're referring to the separation, they're referring to when we split from ourselves as God. So in other words, thinking of God as one being, in order to exist in all forms and to be fully aware of itself, it was a breakup that happened, an infinite breakup of source into the smaller pieces. And so we're all pieces of this grander being or grander form. So when they're talking about atonement, again, let me go back to what it said. That is because, well, everyone must eventually join in. It was not a device which was generated by humanity. So in other words, the opportunity to atone or to come to peace or to resolve or to have a clearing away of energy that's associated with suffering or with the human experience. That's not something that was necessarily produced in this environment. The idea of forgiveness and resolving something in our soul, it didn't start up here. It is something that, it's a tool that we have from our spirit form, from our source beingness. It comes from our higher perspective, our higher version of ourselves. So when we are trying to essentially work through an issue that we've just gone through, or we're trying to come to peace with something, we're trying to make peace with, we're trying to forgive, we're trying to move forward, we're trying to come to resolution within ourselves, it's not something that is based in this reality. It's something that we have to grasp or we have to use that comes from our higher form. So when we are working on forgiveness, when we are working on atonement, we are essentially using a higher version of ourselves, a higher perspective, a higher beingness to help us to kind of resolve that part of our lower state. And so that's what they're talking about here. So it was only after the separation that the defense of atonement and the necessary conditions for its fulfillment were planned. It became increasingly apparent that all of the defenses which humanity can choose to use constructively or destructively were not enough to save it. It was therefore decided that you needed a defense which was so splendid that you could not misuse it, although you could refuse it. Your will could not turn it into a weapon of attack, which is the inherent characteristic of all other defenses. The atonement thus became the only defense which was not a two-edged sword. The atonement actually began long before the resurrection. Many souls offered their efforts on behalf of the separated ones, but they could not withstand the strength of the attack and had to be brought back. Angels came too, but their protection was not enough because the separated ones were not interested in peace. They had already split themselves and were bent on dividing rather than reintegrating. The levels they introduced into themselves turned against each other, and they in turn turned against one another. They established differences, divisions, cleavages, dispersion, and all the other concepts related to the increasing splits they produced. Not being in their right minds, they turned their defenses from protection to assault and acted literally insanely. It was essential to introduce a split-proof device which could be used only to heal if it was used at all. The atonement was built into the space-time belief in order to set a limit on the need for the belief and ultimately to make learning complete. The atonement is the final lesson. Learning itself, like the classrooms in which it occurs, is temporary. Let all those who overestimate human intelligence remember this. The ability to learn has no value when change of understanding is no longer necessary. The eternally creative have nothing to learn. Only after the separation was it necessary to direct the creative force to learning, because changed behavior had become mandatory. Human beings can learn to improve their behavior and also learn to become better and better learners. This increase serves to bring them into closer and closer accord with the sonship. But the sonship itself is a perfect creation, and perfection is not a matter of degree. Only while there are different degrees is learning meaningful. There's a lot here. So, and I'm going to come back to this, guys, because there's a lot here, and they're kind of like, sometimes when I read their stuff, it almost sounds like they're just going on into a ramble. But if you actually go and like pay attention to some of the details, it makes a lot of sense. But you kind of have to see it in sections, because it's almost, reading this is almost like breaking down a dream. When I have a dream, it's all symbolic and there's so many elements and pieces to it. And you have to break it up and split it up into pieces to break down the messages within the dream. This is the same way. When they go into these rambling fits, they are essentially going into like various different directions in what they're talking about. But if you break it up into pieces, you can kind of make sense of the data and of the channeling if you see it in different points and not all as one, because again, it's almost like different messages in one. The evolution of humankind is merely a process by which you proceed from one degree to the next. You correct your previous missteps by stepping forward. This represents a process which is actually incomprehensible in temporal terms, because your return because you return as you go forward. The atonement is the device by which you can free yourself from the past as you go ahead. It undoes your past errors, thus making it unnecessary for you to keep retracing your steps without advancing toward your return. In this sense, the atonement saves time, but like the miracle which serves it, does not abolish it. As long as there is need for atonement, there is need for time. But the atonement as a completed plan does have a unique relationship to time. Until the atonement is finished, its various phases will proceed in time, but the whole atonement stands at its end. At this point, the bridge of the return has been built. If you find discussion of the atonement upsetting, it is because the atonement is a total commitment. You still think this is associated with loss. This is the same mistake all the separated ones make in one way or another. They cannot believe that a defense which cannot attack They cannot believe that a defense which cannot attack is the best defense. Except for this misperception, the angels could have helped them. What do you think the meek shall inherit the earth means? They will literally take it over because of their strength. A two-way defense is inherently weak. Precisely because it has two edges, it can turn against the self very unexpectedly. This tendency cannot be controlled except by miracles. The miracle turns the defense of atonement to the protection of the inner self, which, as it becomes more and more secure, assumes its natural talent of protecting others. The inner self knows itself as both as brother and as son. And I'll leave it there. Let me put a bookmark because I need to know where the hell I'm at. Okay, cool. All right, so what this was talking about, because this went into a whole rant about a bunch of different things. So the first thing it's acknowledging is that when we are in this physical form, when we break away from source, when we come into physical form, when we incarnate, we essentially are incarnating into a lower spectrum, a lower state of being. And what ends up happening is as we come into this lower state of being, we become very much hooked into a cyclical pattern where we continue to perpetuate the experience of suffering here. And so we come here, we experience the illusion of lack or the illusion of separation from source because we're in our unique perspective, and then we begin to experience suffering. And as we begin to experience suffering, we begin to perpetuate the levels of suffering because instead of trying to remember our full state of beingness, we become so ingrained and involved with our limited perspective that we only identify with existing in this limited perspective. And we end up, instead of turning towards ourselves, we're seeing ourselves as source. Instead of embracing all that is as source, we actually turn against source, or we turn on ourselves. So we begin to turn on each other. And so we're all stuck here. We're all in this state. We're all in this limited perspective, and it is painful for us. And instead of remembering what we truly are and bringing some resolution to that, bringing some peace to that, we end up looking at everyone else as well, and we end up turning on each other, and we begin to produce more suffering for each other. And at some point, if we continue and perpetuate that, we end up imploding in our own personal lives, our own personal beingness, and also the communities that we are part of. We end up imploding in those communities as well. So the communities begin to fall apart or begin to break down. And then we have anarchy. We have all these, crazy situations and scenarios that we produce for ourselves, or we kind of end up sticking ourselves with, and then we continue to perpetuate that cycle instead of remembering who we really are, and instead of atoning for the disconnect, instead of atoning for the errors in our processing or in our belief system or in our self-awareness, because that's an error. We're not actually disconnected from source. We are simply under the impression that we're disconnected. So if we remember and we embrace the reality of who and what we are here, then we can still have a we can still have our foot in the door of love and of source and of connection to all things. We can still maintain that because the inner core of our being knows this. It understands this. This is why when we see painful situations or violence, or we see people suffering, it does not feel right. It does not feel appropriate, but it is what it is, and it's what we're encountering, because our core knows that that is not reality. That is not what should be. Our experience in the divine state is what should be. And so there's kind of a struggle going on there. But if we remember and remind ourselves of our divine nature and of who and what we are, we can have a foot in the door of love, and that can serve us. It can actually bring us peace, and it can help us resolve much more effectively and help act as a defense against these lower states. And that's what they're talking about. So when they talk about like the angels falling and like all this other stuff, they're just using metaphors. They're using these symbols to help us understand that we have to have a foot in the door of love. If we exist in this world completely consumed by suffering, completely consumed by the issues, completely consumed by our human nature, and continue to perpetuate in fear or anger or in distrust or in lack, then that is not going to help us to reconnect with the level of happiness or joy. That will only perpetuate and continue that error in functioning. And we pretty much turn our backs on love. We pretty much turn our backs on the rest of creation. We also turn our backs on each other because we're all source here, looking at each other, interacting with each other. So we have to maintain a level of love so that we can balance out some of the experiences here, so that we do not create karma or a larger experience that requires atonement. We do not want to produce more opportunities of atonement. We want to just use these experiences that we have here, that we came here for, and then atone that, and then not create more in the process. And most of us don't do that. Most of us create more issues that we have to atone for, more things that we have to come to peace with. And so we don't really have our foot in the door of love. We end up continuing to perpetuate these cycles, and then we carry that into other lifetimes or into other forms as well. So it becomes this perpetual loop that we get stuck in, and that's what that's talking about. It's basically like getting stuck in the karmic cycle, and how to resolve that, how to make peace with that, how to overcome that. And you do that by focusing on love, remembering that you are love, remembering that we're all source, remembering after the initial moment of pain, that the individual that you're dealing with is still source, is still God. And it doesn't matter whether they remember that or not, they are that. And they're caught in their struggle, they're caught in their pain, they're caught in their suffering. So even though I may think of, like, for example, my stepfather, who I grew up and he was very abusive and he was, very much an aggressive person, that individual, though I suffered greatly because of my experience with that individual, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, they're still source. They are still a representation of source here, and they've forgotten that, and they've completely become consumed and absorbed in their suffering. And the reason why they act the way they do, and the reason why they are being the way they are and perpetuating all of that for everyone else, is because they're so caught up in the pain that they don't know what else to do other than perpetuate the pain. They don't realize that there's an exit or there's an out from that, but they don't realize it, and they don't remember who they really are underneath all of that. Now, is it for us to change that person? No. Is it for us to transform that individual into someone who's got a foot in the... No, we must be examples of that. We must go into the world and operate from a place of example, and if someone asks, then we give them what we can give them. But it is never our purpose to force someone to change or to be something other than what they are choosing for themselves. So if you are dealing with people who are cruel or angry or nasty or have nothing better to do than to simply spew this suffering in the way that they can express it so that you can experience suffering with them, remember that they are still source. They've forgotten who they are. They know not what they do. This is what Christ said. They know not what they do. So it is almost coming to peace within ourselves over who that person is and what they're choosing to be, and just trying to resolve that within ourselves, come to peace with that in ourselves. And it's an atonement, because it brings us back and snaps us back to who we really are, which is source being. So let me go through some of these questions here. So let me see what some of the questions were about the stuff here. Quick outfit change, LOL, looking good. Thank you. My hair's like a freaking mess with all the sensors that I had in it. So let's see. Hey, Red Robin, go ahead and ask me questions about it if you want. I'll have a few minutes to answer that. If you want to ask me about the experiment, I don't mind. That I was just doing in the last hour. Let's see. Hey, Ryan. We did. I remember Freud. It's the human oneness with God is the definition. Okay. How does one go about realizing what we really are and find peace? Through the experience of love. You do not need to experience love from other individuals or other people. You need to express love and find it in yourself. Start there. Because when you can remember the experience of love, even this is why, I think animals are a great way to reconnect with that. Because sometimes we can be very disappointed with people, or we can find ourselves completely, just heartbroken over people, because people are very complex beings and they're caught up in their suffering, and that makes it complicated. With animals are in pain. If they're in pain, they're going to lash out because they want to stop feeling that, and you trying to mess with them might make it worse. So they're either going to lash out, or if they love you or in that state of being, they're going to express love. So animals are a great way to reconnect with the expression. This is why I love my mama cat so much, because I believe my mama cat is a aspect of my own soul, and it's reflecting back the love that I have for myself as source in form. So when I can experience that emotion and I can feel that love, then I dig deep for that feeling as often as I can, and I try to show it as often as I can with our communications right now, with our opportunities to connect with people in my life, etc. I just try to express that, and I don't expect anything in return. I just give the love as much as I can, and that's the goal. Give that love as much as you can, because what will happen at that point is, as you begin to practice that, it will be easier to move forward or to let go of the things that have consumed you or caused you pain and suffering yourself, if it is coming from another person. Granted, there are people in our lives that, because they've been in our lives for so long, it is harder to do it with people who have been in our lives a lot longer, who produce pain for us. It is easier to do it with people who we don't have an invested interest in, or we don't have as much of a close connection to, but they're still people. You're still a reflection of me. So if you do one thing that upsets me, it's still one thing that upsets me, but it doesn't wipe away the fact that you're still sourced in human form, and that I still carry love for you, because I understand that level of love, because I've been practicing it on a regular basis. So it's about practicing that level of love, because once you build that up inside of you, and you remain and retain that as a regular state of being, even if you go through an hour of craziness, or even if you have a traumatic experience, or even if you have someone that pisses you off, it's going to be easier to reconnect to that level of love and get back into that mode and start sending it back out. And almost it will actually begin to resolve and bring you to peace with the situation that had to do with the person that pissed you off. So that's what it does. It actually helps to heal and helps you to not recover, but remember who you are, and that what you were thinking was bothering you was actually not a reality. It was just a situational perspective that you held, that you chose to hold in that moment when you were reacting or feeling a reaction to the thing you were encountering. Is it safe to assume God's source is love? Yes, God's source is love. God's source is all things. You have to remember, the good and the bad, all of it is part of source, because the bad, or the suffering in this world, is an illusion created by source to give itself the opportunity for contrasting experiences, for unique perspectives. It is an illusion. So in other words, if someone is an incredible actress and they want to experience a version of themselves that is just evil, then they may put on a costume, put on makeup, and then go out and act it. That doesn't mean that that's actually who they are. It is a pretend experience. It is an illusion to help produce opportunities for experience for others who are going to encounter that person as well, and for the individual. So it's all just an act. In other words, all of this that we exist in, all of this physical world is simply a pretend reality. It is a pretend, it is a play, it is a drama that is not real. It is just TV for the purpose of Source expressing itself and having a damn good time doing it. So it is all part of the process of experiencing for Source, but it isn't real. It is simply a act. It is a play. Red Robin's like, where do the results go? Do you match up the colors with the video? Do you see when you were hotter, you were more red and not so much more green? What was your impression of the experience? Yeah, so with the results of the test that I was doing in the last hour, what I'm going to do is I want to see what the patterns are going to be like with different daily activities. So if I'm just sitting watching TV, what does the pattern of my brain look like? If I'm doing a reading for people or I'm doing mediumship, what are the patterns in my brain look like? What's being activated? What's being triggered? I noticed this a little bit because I didn't get a chance to pay as much attention to it, but I've noticed this on 2 occasions where every single spectrum lit up from the active spectrum in my brain. So the theta, the gamma, and also the beta. So, what is it? Was it delta? Was it delta? Oh, I think I'm missing theta. Yeah, it's delta is sleep. Theta is that in between state, and then there's alpha. I'm sorry, alpha and beta. So theta, alpha, and beta. Yesterday, I noticed something today that I caught when I was doing the readings with the thing on, and then I saw yesterday as well. Even though my head, it lit up in certain instances or it kind of, intensified, there was something that I noticed yesterday that happened today again. I was sitting here watching TV. I had it on my head. I was recording it, and it was showing its, whatever colors it was showing with the different frequencies. But then as soon as Mama Cat came in and started to give me some loving, every single, all 3, the theta, the beta, and also the alpha waves, every single one, they all looked very similar. Like they all lit up almost at the same time and every single frequency. And I was like, well, that's interesting because it's all, and I was noticing yesterday that it would just be theta would be lighting up, but gamma, alpha or beta wasn't lighting up. And beta is the thinking mind. It's the part of your brain that it's almost about thinking and processing data. Alpha is a relaxed state or like a resting state, and then theta is like an in between sleep and relaxed state. So, and theta is the one that is more associated with deeper levels of consciousness or beingness. Alpha is also a very relaxed state. Many people who are psychics or mediums, they tend to also to operate in certain bands of alpha and in theta. Theta is the one where people associate with spiritual experiences. So you notice that theta was the one that was lighting up for most of the stuff. But I noticed when I was doing some of the readings, all of them lit up the same exact way, the way they did with Mama Cat when she came around yesterday and she was giving me some loving. So I thought that was so interesting, and I was like, well, that's interesting. And when Mama Cat comes around, it's a connection of love with a being. So I was like, I wonder if that's what was happening in certain instances. And I also noticed it when I would see someone, I would see them and I would feel love for them. And if you notice, if you were to go back to the video on like YouTube or whatever, I'm going to post them. I'm going to make them all public. But you'll notice that when I'm expressing love, you'll notice all the 3 patterns lighting up as well. So I thought that was really interesting. And that is, I believe, an expression of love, or it represents love in some way. That's what I'm thinking. But I'm going to put them side by side so people can see what my brain is doing in different instances. But the point of the experiment is to offer scientific data to people who might have a background in brain chemistry or in brain waves, or who are experienced with EEGs, because I would like to show information that might make these scientists feel or acknowledge that there's something going on here, and that this needs to be given more credibility, and this needs to be given more serious testing. There isn't enough testing in the with psychics and with mediums. And so I'm trying to kind of like throw out like some some samples to see if they'll bite, because I want to get more people to take this more seriously. But the only way I can do that is if I provide evidence that supports that there's something going on. And that's why I'm doing the experiment with different phases of my brain at different parts of my day, going through different experiences. So that's what the data is about. General Robbins says, Tyler Henry did something similar, and he said in live he was doing more testing. Yeah, I think, the people who are well-known psychics and mediums, I'm sure they have an easier way of being able to do that. I'm not trying to wait around to be someone known. I'm not trying to wait around for a scientist to approach me. I'm like, screw this. I just bought the damn device myself. It is not a cheap device. I will tell y'all that, just so you know. And I got mine secondhand because I was like, I'm not paying full price for this puppy. So I bought it secondhand because I was like, I got it from someone who already had it for a while and they didn't need it anymore. And so I was like, I'm going to get it from this person and I'm going to use it because that's what I was trying to do. And it's harder, I believe that when you're in a laboratory, even though it's more controlled, it's also harder to duplicate what people are doing in their everyday experience. I want to give them an everyday example of the experience so that they have that as well. That's why I did it also on camera, so that's recording my brainwaves and also me and what I'm actually doing in the moment that I'm having those reactions. So you can kind of correlate what's happening there as well. Let's see, going over here, and then I think I'm going to drop out because I'm getting hungry. There's the trolls. The trolls are in the rooms again. Let's see. There are personal readings. Yeah, they're all personal readings. So there's nobody asking me any questions about the study group. They're all like winning readings. So yeah. All right, guys. I love you all. I will be back on Friday. We're going to do the experiment again. And as soon as I get enough of the data, I'm going to actually upload the video so y'all can follow along as well. Because I really want y'all to see like what that's all about. And also, I just think it's really interesting. I have another device. I don't know if y'all have heard of it. It's called the God Helmet. It is a device that was created in a laboratory. What it does is it basically triggers certain brainwave activity as well. I'm also going to do an experiment with that and also the God Helmet on at the same time to see if that changes or can reproduce some of the activity that's happening in my brain when I'm reading. Because if that's the case, there's like, you can adjust the God Helmet, so you can move around the things that send the impulses into your brain. So I'm going to do that as well at some point. I was wanting to do that last year. Like I said, I wasn't able to because I got caught up in everything that was going on this year. And I was like, can't do it. I don't have the bandwidth to do it this year. So now I've finally gotten around to it. But all right, guys, I love you all. I will be back, like I said, on Friday.